Well, everyone, we got a massive story. A $2 million ransom was not paid by Sony, and because of that, 1.3 million documents related to Insomniac games are now on the internet. And these are extremely serious. These are detailing the personal information, the personal details of many staff involved, even going as far as passport scans, as well as other internal documents, game builds, and plans for the next 10 years of developments at the studio. Now, make no mistake here, this hack has done incredible damage already. It will continue to do so. Today, we're going to take you through what happened, refresh you in our position around reporting on hacks like this, and address some of the most newsworthy elements that have appeared. Insofar as what's newsworthy, this is about what happens at the highest echelons of a company like Sony, which is extremely newsworthy, I believe, to our audience. Do we really care about the next 85 Spider-Mans or the next Wolverine and Clank? No, we don't. This isn't about spoiling a games lineup for a company. That's not what we're going to be doing. What it is about, though, is reporting the stuff that is genuinely newsworthy, that I think people deserve to know, and deserve to know in a way that is not sensationalized and is reasonable. Reporting like this takes time and consideration, which is why we've delayed running this story to get a proper handle of the facts, and it's only possible with your support, be it direct on Ghost or with today's sponsor. Revolutionize your news experience with ground.news/Bellular. My link gets you 40% off their Vantage plan. And you're going to want that because Ground is the ultimate news service. What they do is they process over 50,000 daily articles. They sort them all into stories. They analyze source diversity, political bias, ownership, and they give you really awesome tools like their headline comparison and bias insights, which basically means while you're going around a story, you can quite quickly understand with balance what's going on. I mean, take this sheer hell story from the media mad lad Mr. Zaslav, who wants Warner Bros. Discovery to merge with Paramount Plus because streaming services are literally hell. This story's coverage is quite fun at the time anyway. It was 38% left, 52% center, 10% right, and it was kind of neat to see the different ways that each side talked about it, with some of the right-leaning sources talking more about the rather embattled financial state of one of the companies. So it was quite interesting. Obviously, though, with the likes of what's going on in the Middle East, the US election, some of those very important things, that's where Ground is really powerful. For instance, the recent Colorado Supreme Court ruling about Trump and the 14th Amendment. That's obviously one that was covered a bit differently across the spectrum, and one thing that's super powerful here is their blind spot tool, which basically, based on what you read, will surface for you information, news stories that you're not likely to see otherwise. It's an awesome way to get the news and to actually understand things. Ground's toolset, including their browser extension, mail alerts for blind spot, it helps us navigate media bias, navigate factuality issues, providing us with a comprehensive view from all angles, and you can get your Vantage plan at 40% off at ground.news/Bellular. Right, Insomniac Games was hacked last week. About 1.7 terabytes of data was stolen from the company and then ransomed. The group involved, called Residia, threatened to release data unless their ransom was met by Sony. It was not met, and because of that, they're claiming that 98% of not sold data is available publicly, resulting in these 1.3 million sensitive documents floating around. Now, this is said to include everything from bootable builds of Wolverine. I feel comfortable talking about Wolverine because that is an upcoming announced game that everybody knows about, to detailed plans of their next decade of games, to things as personally damaging as employee passport scans and personal information. And the thing is, this doesn't just impact people currently working at the company, who very hopefully are being supported in a fairly significant way with all of this emergency work that they're going to have to do right before the holiday break with all of their personal data that the company has being spilt, but also ex-staff whose data is on file. Here's someone, Melissa Kelly, who's not worked at Insomniac Games for 2 years, but has said that already they've had credit cards flagged for fraud and problems like that, which is quite brutal. We will be seeing repercussions of this for years then. Following this, there will be a massive InfoSec overhaul at Insomniac, probably at PlayStation as well. This is going to be very, very disruptive. For staff, they'll have to reset their credit cards and that kind of thing, and there's a tricky thing when the internet knows where you live. I'm not saying that there's an immediate risk to people, but should some sort of drama or problem or bad actors happen in the future, this data is now out there and exists, and nobody knows what random people they don't know will do, and that can mean that people will not feel safe. And that is a very real threat to people, the feeling of unease, the anxiety. Now, the choice here of saying hack is important. This is not a passive leak. That implies maybe a screen seen by somebody on public transport, an email going to the wrong person, a mistake. No, this is an active hack. This is mercenary hackers illegally accessing systems and personal data and trying to use that to blackmail a company. It is a pretty devastating one that's reminiscent of the early 2020 Capcom ransomware attack or the GTA 6 hack, both of which revealed plans for those companies years in advance. And that brings us to how we even deal with a situation like this. The hacked and distributed information is one thing, but coverage around them is also a story here. It has exploded across the internet. Now, in one sense that there's a lot of engagement here is a good thing. People are actually caring that a bad thing has happened to this developer, and there is an outpouring of support for the devs who are now left in a really shitty position. That is good. So to break it down, for some people, there's no ethical way to cover any aspect of this hack as a result of the hack sort of benefiting as a story from any reporting. For others, though, this hack is an event that can be covered, but to dig into details in a further way is to further the harm done by the ransomware gang. It's the idea of fruit of a poisoned tree. Then I think there's the more complex version. The hack itself is a valid story, as are the contents that do not relate to personal information, because the press, the free press, should not be beholden to a company's desires. Otherwise, then, you get a question of what is reporting and what is PR, as was very excellently articulated by Riley over at Aftermath. I'll just read a quote. If how an upcoming game looks is important and worth reporting on, then isn't it true even when we're not given permission to say so by PR departments? There's a lot of arguments about the ethical positions here. I'll just make it pretty clear for us, right? We have that conversation too. Look, we are not the games industry on this channel, right? We do intend, obviously, to surface the views of a variety of developers and to represent them to an audience in a way that is fair, in a way that hopefully educates that audience to what the development side of things is actually like. But that doesn't mean we're always going to be approaching events the same way that the games industry will, that publishers will, that PR firms will. For us then, and following on from what happened with Rockstar, this is a malicious criminal hack that released personal details of people in a way that actively threatens their livelihoods, potentially aspects of their safety at one of the worst points in time of the year for that to happen. And that absolutely must be the starting point of today's story. The information from the hack, though, is public. It cannot be unpublicked. You are going to see things about Sony and Insomniac and others. We can at least explain how you should understand these things, put them into the right context, and make this an educational experience rather than one that is dominated by tweets that virally spread that don't cover the full picture. So because of that, there's things I'll be approaching today in more detail, but broadly, that will be limited to Sony internal corporate information that is about the wider games industry. I think there is minimal newsworthiness to a channel like ours of just talking about what the next 10 years of Insomniac games are, right? There's not, I mean, we don't really care about that. This is about what's going on, what are the big moves. So our position here is a judgment then on whether our reporting will basically bring harm to an individual, which, as much as the legal system would like to make you think also includes a company, does not include a company because companies are not people, and whether there's an element of the story that can be genuinely, educational in a way that is responsible. That is overall, as a team, what we came to. What I will say personally here is I think there has been a lot of reactionary bollocks when it comes to this. I think there are people in the industry and the press side that are not applying their principles fairly across different hack stories, who are doing things here that they didn't do with GTA or with Capcom. I think some people are playing rather foul of an in-group bias. I think they're being led on by the rationalization machine for their emotions that is the human brain. A dev may not want us to cover the Sony corporate stuff, but that's okay, because guess what? We are the press. To me, it was pretty insane to see some devs, people in the journalism space, going after Ash Parrish, who writes for The Verge, for basically her explaining how reporting works, what's newsworthy, how these things actually are done ethically. So now that that's done, and you're not going to get BS from me, let's get into the damn thing then. The number one caveat, anything we talk about here is only valid as of the day it was written down, because these are documents. You may not have the most recent documents. This is an industry that chops and changes so damn fast that things are just kind of all crazy. So as such, development, gameplay, scripts, character designs, game pitches, those are functionally not that interesting to us. I'm happy to let the devs cook. We don't need to go in and, kind of rain that whole parade. I just don't see the positive value in that. And also, odds are the final thing will be very different to what's seen in that information. What we can do, though, is talk about retrospective numbers, feelings, and how these things are interpreted. So, with that in mind, let's talk about some general sales numbers. So, this is believed to be from February 2022. So, space afterwards to account for the shift to PlayStation Plus premium libraries and many of those things being available there. So there's some things worth noting from this info. Lifetime to date digital sales are far lower than you may have expected for many titles. MLB 21 is a high point, right? It's sitting there at a digital percentage of 61. But look at, say, Returnal, 39%, Death Stranding 1.5, 11%, Ratchet & Clank Rifts Apart, 24%. Those are rather surprising to me. Now, what you can, though, see is the PlayStation games, broadly speaking, are selling very well. But there are some oddities, I think, within this dataset. Number one, Horizon outsold everything that wasn't God of War or Spider-Man on the PS4, including Last of Us 2 and Uncharted 4. And that does kind of explain Sony leaning in that franchise for VR titles, which, yes, there's a VR title within that, transmedia opportunities, and of course the upcoming co-op multiplayer game for Horizon. We also see that Bloodborne has hit 7 million lifetime units, which is about as many sales as Days Gone got. Now, remasters and PS5 ports are routinely doing well. Ghost of Tsushima PS5 actually made up nearly a quarter of the original release in sales. And of course, because the PS5 version of that game is great, it got some pretty nice, robust post-launch content support as well. You just buy that PS5 edition and you're going to have an amazing time. So that is a game, of course, that will just have a very long tail of sales for years and years to come, as far as I'm concerned. But this is really only one piece of the puzzle. Knowing how much a game sold is one thing. What maybe matters more is how much it earned compared to how much it cost to make. And one of the games that's gone viral in this slide that seemingly shows Insomniac Games' return on investment, including projections for further titles. So, let me water your eyes then, with the projected costs of AAA development in the 2020s being a minimum of $300 million. It's a lot of dollars. I mean, damn, I just watched Godzilla Minus One, an absolutely 10 out of 10, 5-star movie, only cost 15 mil to make. So I suppose you could make, 20 of those for the cost of a Spider-Man. Anyway, it also apparently helps to know here that Marvel has committed $120 million to each of the titles they've commissioned from Insomniac, alongside a $9 million advance in exchange for exclusivity around licenses and healthy royalties of 9 to 18% digital sales, or 19 to 26% of physical sales, as well as a get-out clause of being able to cancel if any project fails to sell at least 6 million copies in the first year. That is an interesting thing. These are heavily subscribed games, and that impacts the minimum costs. Now, there can be some downsides to that. As an example, whenever Epic Games was laying off a lot of staff this year, one of the things that they said is that basically they were spending more money than they were bringing in, and that while Fortnite revenues have surged back up, which is very healthy for the company, one of the problems they faced is that their revenues went up basically because of license-based deals, with other brands and things like that. So while they made more money, their unit economics actually got worse because they had to give royalties away, which certainly will be a downside with the likes of Spider-Man, but obviously Spider-Man has been so successful that I truly do imagine this is a situation where both parties are just absolutely thrilled with how it's going on. Where it gets interesting then is talking about some upcoming revenue, where you can take a look at, this is the one that actually would matter to me, Ratchet & Clank, apparently with 2.2 million lifetime units, a total profit of, though, minus $8 million, a minus 10% ROI, and a break-even of needing to make 2 million more. That was quite surprising to me, actually. Everyone is focused on the loss here. This suggestion that Rift Apart, in fact, was a 10% loss on their investment. Now, that is obviously newsworthy in so many ways. This was a flagship PS5 game that showcased their SSD and required their SSD. Unlike, say, some of the Spider-Man stuff that went on. Unlike, say, Ghost of Tsushima that obviously came out on both platforms. That makes sense, obviously, with the release dates, but you get my point here. It's quite interesting. Now, that does ignore some things. Number one, there's no date in this slide. That there's no date in this slide really, really does matter. And also, loss leaders are a thing, especially when you are developing revolutionary gameplay-changing technologies in their case for save load, that enabled that game to exist and to flow in the way that it does. And certainly, as much as it is pretty impressive how the Rifts work on, PC or even on a Steam Deck, you look at it in PS5 and it's just incredible. When we go back and we look at our general sales numbers, what do we see? We see that lifetime to date in February 2022 is 145 million. So yes, Ratchet & Clank A Rift Apart is absolutely fine. You can see by the time of this document, it's $73 million. And really, this is a part of why I want to do this coverage. We've seen people saying, Ratchet & Clank lost money, Sony's doomed. And that has fueled, obviously, so much console war BS. Is it not better that we cover the story properly, where this had $73 million of revenue and needed $2 more million to hit its break-even point, but then you cross-reference it with other leaked information and find out that over a year ago, it was up at $145 million, which, on a total cost of $81 million means that game was an extremely healthy profit, and Insomniac should be very pleased with themselves, and Sony will no doubt be happy with them too. So that's one of the reasons why covering these properly is actually worth doing. The game is fine. This is a slide that was showing current projections likely before Ratchet & Clank even came out. Yeah, I really wouldn't worry, and that's the value of covering a story like this. Then we have the PC gaming angle. These are details from February of 2023. We can see that Sony is doing very well out of its PC ports on Steam alone. And overall, what we see is this. Sackboy, by that time, had sold 62.9 thousand units. Miles Morales, 450k. Uncharted Legacy of Thieves, 483k. Spider-Man Remastered, 1.3 million. And at the time, it had been out for 6 months and had 400,000 fewer sales than Days Gone's 1.7 million. Days Gone and Zero Dawn had been out for at least 1.5 years by the time of this slide, and you can see Horizon Zero Dawn got 3.3 million sales on the PC, which is a very, very healthy number, and God of War got 2.5 million sales, of course, in a lot less time as well. So, yeah, whenever Ragnarok comes to PC, you can obviously see that doing very well. Same, of course, goes for the likes of Spider-Man 2 whenever that comes out. And basically what we see here is, in terms of sales, it's not enough for them to just drop something on Steam. Miles Morales, excellent game, 450,000 sales, which is a hell of a lot, but it's not, up in the millions. Sackboy, 62.9k, I think just less of a PC audience game, it would seem. So it doesn't mean guaranteed success, but Steam has been very successful for PlayStation, and in this case, what's good for them is also good for us as PC gamers. If their incentives are aligned with ours, then it means that we get the excellent games that PlayStation pays to make on the platform that we enjoy, and that is a win-win for everybody. Now, a lot of these facts, while we are seeing them here from Sony's own data, a lot of this had been internalized by players by just looking at player numbers in Steam. Now, there are some numbers floating around here that we were not able to see hard sources for. Now, these suggest a 4.6 million projected budget for bringing Spider-Man 2 to PC, while Miles Morales only cost 1.5 million. Certainly, that is some of the most incredible bang for your buck that you're going to get if true. As for Spider-Man 2 having that budget, Miles costing a bit little, you would imagine with Miles being built off Spider-Man Remastered that it would have been a lot cheaper to do that because it's all fundamentally similar tech. So that said, that's my expectation. Basically, they're effectively free returns on investment for Sony. But Sony's wider investment in the ecosystem isn't necessarily about taking the fight to Microsoft. So let's talk then about the broader context here, because one of the important things that we've seen in these slides is basically the thoughts Sony have about the console space and Activision acquisition. Here's a slide. Microsoft's acquisition of ATVI positions it to leapfrog our current pillars. So if you were wondering why Jim Ryan and co. were going so hard in those lawsuits, we're really trying to drum up the Call of Duty exclusivity angle, it's because here we see an internal document saying they could be leapfrogged. They say Activision provides incredible strategic value across live service games, which we know Sony, at certainly this point, was really wanting to get into, scale on mobile and PC storefront with Battle.net. In addition, they're building a mobile game store to compete with Apple and Google. Of course, what's happened since then is Epic having their big win against Google. So maybe that could open the door to more. So while their concern here was not about the Epic Store, it was about Microsoft, well, what's good for Epic is probably good for Microsoft, and they will not like that. These are not surprising things, because basically, if we can say that Activision is strategically valuable, Sony absolutely can as well, and they're paying people a lot more to analyze and, to actually make projections for what a case like that looks like. And this is where it's fascinating to get into. Industry major shifts and trends. The Call of Duty threat, in 2027. And here's where they feel threatened. A shift from PlayStation to Xbox, with timing and in-game differential being used as Microsoft's weapons against Sony. Also subscriptions. Microsoft's comprehensive ecosystem coupled with exclusivity creates greater dominance. Sony impact. Massive threat to PS Plus. Upwards of $1.5 billion of annual threat, gap to fill. They're just saying here 45 million subs, times $12, times 12 months, times 20%, and that's basically how they're getting their numbers. Day and date threat, post-acquisition. Game Pass, day and date. Or, of course, more likely, Game Pass with a premium upgrade DLC, day and date, for that delicious paid early access. And it's interesting just reading their own verbiage here. Like, look at this leapfrog, where they're talking about the strategic value, and they say Sony's pillars are already dated and behind the competition. I mean, that's basically them admitting that in many ways they're coasting off the success of massive wins they had in the previous console generation, and internally, they're actually seeing the need to adapt. So if you think about why Sony wanted to move into live services, you can see the sorts of things that they were profoundly worried about as seen in this document. Overall then, this is stuff that we could intuit, but the bit that matters is seeing it right from the horse's mouth. Sony doesn't have a live service background, they don't have a mobile infrastructure, in spite of trying multiple times, they don't have a PC background, even though they're having success launching games on Steam. They are succeeding massively in console, yes, but they evidently feel outmaneuvered elsewhere in the industry. And that they feel weak in areas where they're barely challenging Microsoft is obviously not a surprise. What is interesting though is the likes of subscription revenue. And that's when we hit PS Plus. It is, in its options, kind of a halfway house between being a service that lets you play games online and then one that gives you the sheer quantity of games that, say, a Game Pass does. But of course, Game Pass is doing that more and more on a day one basis. Sony basically know this, and they know they won't be able to compete with Game Pass on their own terms. I mean, look at this. Premium content, expectation of free, best-in-class games creates unsustainable model, monthly and incremental subs won't cover investment. That is, again, not a new thought, but what matters is it's being written down. Let's zoom back up to this document here, where you can see some of those, those lifetime revenues, right? I mean, there you have Last of Us Part 2, net sales, $447 million. And there's other similarly large numbers. Spider-Man, $827 million. Do you think they can turn down the best part of a cool bill by putting that on PS Plus? I know they'll make money, but as they say, and I think correctly, their incremental subs, their monthly subs, will not cover the cost of that. In no way. But ultimately, Microsoft has got the balance sheet. Microsoft is in business segments that Sony isn't in, like Azure, like Enterprise, and all of that. And yes, Sony may do televisions, but the money that's in the television business is not what's going on with Microsoft, while also Microsoft are benefiting from this very large, hello, OpenAI, AI, and their, stock go up. And that is going to be goddamn terrifying for the likes of Sony, who do not have that insane amount of capital backing them up. Even though, obviously, being Sony, they do have a lot of capital. It's just Microsoft, in case you haven't noticed, is really big. So TLDR, Sony know that a one-to-one Game Pass competitor will not work for them on a basic unit economics basis. And that is where things get interesting, because in a recent statement, Phil Spencer said, with Windows Central, we have a service that is financially viable, meaning it makes money in Game Pass. We put a lot of money into the market, over $1 billion a year, supporting third-party games coming into Game Pass. So, we've been arguing this for a while, but basically Sony and Xbox are taking entirely different strategies here. Sony is sticking to their premium model even in their live service games, likely. And this basically means they can cancel or sort of massively push back 6 of them as they have and frame it as ensuring quality. Microsoft, though, they'll just be able to take every other approach that Sony hasn't been able to. So essentially what works for Microsoft won't work for Sony. Think about Sony's position then. Overall, they know consoles are big, but they're going to be thinking about emerging markets. That is going to mean, as much as it may pain you to hear this and pains me to say it, mobile. And of course, a part of mobile can be good. It can be the likes of streaming a game to your phone, using a Backbone controller, and just having a real fun time. I've played loads of proper Game Pass games with my Backbone controller on my phone, and I've had a great time. I played Jedi Fallen Order on my Backbone controller on my phone in bed on the local home streaming, and it was buttery smooth and an awesome experience. Don't know why you get a PlayStation Portal, but I suppose if $200 to do that within your own home is okay to you, like, it is a good experience, just you can do it in your phone. The point basically is, though, where's King? They don't have a King. Now, yes, Sony does have some, foots in the gacha space. If memory serves, it's basically because of, like, Japanese companies that are under them or that they publish with. I forget exactly, but they don't really have a King-like situation. So there's that. On PC, they're not as competitive. They just aren't. Because they're in a really tough position where they want to keep the PlayStation being the big, cool, exclusive thing, right? If somebody suddenly knows that they can play the new, amazing PlayStation games on a PC day and date, well, that actually is a problem for Sony, because then that customer can get the best of Sony while being a Game Pass subscriber on their PC. And positionally, that might make Sony quite a lot of money now. As we've seen, 3.3 million sales for Horizon Zero Dawn on PC. But they know that in the medium term, that is them losing some of their platform advantage. So basically, they're winning in games. They're, I think, winning on the console because of the games. But it does appear that on the rest of it, they know that they have won by playing yesterday's game. The most recent thing they've tried to do is that massive live service push. That is a push that seems to have failed, or at least a push that seems to be fairly delayed. It's not something I'll cover today, but obviously there was Deviation Games. That was a whole bunch of ex-Treyarch people. It seems that their live service project imploded, and there was layoffs there, and that's just one other example of Sony and live services not necessarily going well, all happening around the same time that their multi-plat live service bet, which was the acquisition of Bungie, is running aground, and they're in a challenging situation where Bungie were brought in as the live service experts in our industry, and then they immediately fumbled the bag. It's quite tough. That's the key takeaway here. They have all the things they could want in the short term, and they know they need to shift their eggs into different baskets in the long term because they're actually looking at grand strategy here, which is exactly what they should be doing. I think that Microsoft, when they didn't have the games, didn't have the console, didn't have anything, they weren't able to win tactically, so they had to try competing on strategic terms. Now, the fruits are slowly beginning to sprout, to yield, to, I don't know, fall off the feckin' tree, whatever it may be, because they played strategy. They're strategically winning, even though it feels like they're tactically losing all the time. That's the funny situation with Microsoft, and as much as it is counterintuitive, it's enough that Sony are obviously quite worried. And not hilarious, that's the wrong word, but as we covered in a video 3 days ago, the Californian department that filed the lawsuit against Activision Blizzard, ultimately, them doing that is what weakened the position of the Activision board to the point where the acquisition is something that Microsoft felt they could actually do for a price that they were comfortable with, and that has led to what Sony are calling a massive threat, one that they think may result in their competition leapfrogging them. What a crazy story. I hope you can see today that this is actually worth talking about. It is okay to talk about the newsworthy parts of a leak in a responsible manner that adds context and leaves people better educated, better informed, and better able to process the information that is thrown at them by the internet. I'm not going to try to grandstand and do the, I don't know, maybe this inherently is, but it just seems to be a lot of moral grandstanding that seems to be mostly to do with in-group bias that people have not applied to other situations of leaks, which to me feels quite hypocritical. I don't know. I get people want to be liked by, liked by developers. Don't we all? Devs are awesome. Whenever I go to Gamescom or GDC, it's not as a member of the press. It's as a developer, right? That's how we go because we're also a game studio. But when I sit down here on this chair and the team behind this channel, what do? What are we? We're the goddamn press. And that means we've got a responsibility to bring the newsworthy stuff to you guys and to actually put the effort in to bring it to you guys in a way that is ethical and that is actually providing you the necessary context. That is it for today's story. Let me know what you think. If you want to support the show, of course, check out today's sponsor. And with that said, I'll see you next time.